Good evening. Hope all of you are well. We're learning Maseches, Yevamos, daf Chaf Tes. We're starting at a Mishnah about 10 lines from the bottom of Kaf Ches Amud Beis. Let's jump right in. Shlosha Achim. There are three brothers. So far, so good. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Shnai mehem nesuin shtei achayos. Two of the brothers, Reuven and Shimon, are married to sisters. The sisters are Rachel and Shoshana. Let's do the alliterative match. Rachel is married to Reuven. Shoshana is married to Shimon. Now, either of these brothers are married to two sisters, O Isha Ubita, or one is married to a mother while the other is married to her daughter, O Isha Ubasbita, O Isha Ubaspina. Whatever the dynamic is, it's Reuven and Shimon married to a pair of women who have a relationship to one another. Hare Elu, in these cases, now the Gemara is actually missing some words here. What it should say is then Umesu, that the husbands died, but the halacha would then be hareilu choltzos v'lo misyabmos, that these women get chalitza, but they do not get yibum. For Reb Shimon Poter, Reb Shimon says they don't even need chalitza; they're fine, they're in the clear, they can walk away, no problem at all. We'll discuss this in the Gemara. Now, in regards to this case, hayasa achas mehen asura alav iser erva. If Levi, the third brother, who now has these two Yevamos, who are pining for marriage, if one of them is an Isser Erva, so obviously Asr Ba, he cannot marry that one. However, Umutter Be'achosa, he would be allowed to marry the sister of. And what if one of these women, in one of these cases, was Isser Mitzvah or Isser Kedusha? So there too, the halacha is Choltzos V'lo Misyabmos. If you have the Oz V'Hadar, you'll see a little note here at the very end of the Mishnah, which indicates a discussion about whether or not Reb Shimon adds in Potter here as well, like he did earlier in the Mishnah. Let's jump in. Why is it that in the first case, where these women fell as Yevamos to Levi, why does Reb Shimon say they don't even need chalitza? The Gemara opens with a brisa, 5 lines from the bottom, Kav Ches Amud Beis, Tanya Reb Shimon Poter b'shtein mina chalitza mina yibum. They're exempt from both. They're not allowed to have yibum, and they don't need chalitza. Why? Shenehamar v'isha lachosa lo sikach litzuror. That when it comes to a woman and her sister, that we can't have them both become tsaros at the same time. B'shashenasu tsaros, at the moment when they both became tsaros, zulazu, toward one another, lo yehei lecha likuchen afilu ba'achas man, then you cannot have any acquisitions, namely you cannot get married to either of them. That's how Reb Shimon reads the pasuk. Then our Mishnah had said that if in this case one of the women was an erva to Levi, then we said that in that case, Levi cannot marry the erva, but he can marry the other woman. And the Gemara says, Hasu lamali. Why do I need this case? Hainu hach. It's the same as the case that we learned yesterday in the Mishnah, where in a case where one of the two Yevamos is an erva, so then the Yavam is not allowed to marry the erva, but he can marry the other woman. So says the Gemara, why are we repeating this case? L'Reb Shimon itzrich. We need it in order to understand the shita of Reb Shimon clearly. I might have thought, since, as we learned in the beginning of the Mishnah, that Reb Shimon is of the opinion that when these two sisters are Yevamos, that they don't need chalitza or yibum, because as we learned, they are exempt from the pasuk. So then maybe ligzor, we should have a gzeira in this case of the Mishnah, where one of the women is an erva to Levi, mishum beizachayos to Alma. We should, because of the case of beizachayos to Alma, we're concerned that in a regular case that we might make an error, kamash malan, that we don't have any of those concerns, that even in that case we would say that chalitza would be sufficient. Says the Gemara, Isser mitzvah, what if one of the women had an Isser mitzvah, top of Chaf Tes Amud Aleph? Why do we need this to be the case? That should not be true. By the case of Isser mitzvah, we said that there's chalitza. Why doesn't Reb Shimon argue over here? He said that in a case where two women are Yevamos and their sisters, that they should not even need chalitza. Yet in this case of Isser mitzvah, the Mishnah says that one of them is allowed to be married. Nope, that one of them has chalitza and the other, it's chalitza or yibum. It's chalitza velo misyabnos. Let's just be clear. In the case of Isser Mitzvah, the last case of the Mishnah, there is chalitza and no yibum. So the Gemara at the top of Chaf Tes Amud Aleph says, why isn't Reb Shimon kicking up sand? He should say that there should be no chalitza even in this case. So the Gemara says that the reason why in our Mishnah the case of Isser Mitzvah requires chalitza is gzeira mishum Isser Mitzvah de Alma, because we're talking about a concern about a woman who only has the status of Isser Mitzvah, even when her sister isn't the other Yevama, she's by herself. So we're concerned that in that case, you might have made an error and assumed, Reb Shimon might have been concerned that there should have been no Chalitza in that case. Therefore, we have a Gzeira when it comes to Isser Mitzvah that we have this extra level of care, which is to do Chalitza. Says the Gemara, Hatenach Ihi, I could understand the woman who has status as an Isser Mitzvah herself. I understand that your Gzeira might apply to her, because according to Reb Shimon, an Isser Mitzvah in general should need Chalitza, but over here, he would say Pater, but he has a Gzeira on that woman. So I understand in regards to that woman. But Achosa, why would we say that by her sister? The sister doesn't have a blemish of any kind. Achosa, ma'ika lememar. Why would he require that she have chalitza in this case of our Mishnah? He should say that she's petura. Says the Gemara, Gezerah achosa mishum lasadida. The reason why the sister has a gzera to do chalitza is mishum lasadida. If you take a look at Rashi, Rashi has a very strange language here. Lasa, Rashi says mishum lasa dida, mishum mazel dida, because of her mazel. It's not such a simple language, but the way that some of the Meforshim understand is we're afraid that they're going to misunderstand which sister needs to do chalitza and not. So therefore, whenever we require one to do chalitza, we require the other. Whenever one is exempt, we will exempt the other. Asks the Gemara, if Reb Shimon has this concern here, a gzera, as to why we need chalitza here, v'hagabe erva lo gazrin, and why don't we have the same exact gzera, the same concern by cases of erva? Why do we only have this concern in the case of Isser Mitzvah and Isser Kedusha? Says the Gemara, erva is different than Isser Mitzvah. Shiny erva, de migmar gmiri, everyone is learned in these areas. De migmar gmiri la inche, people are very learned about erva. The kala islay, people talk about it. You know when one of the women you're about to marry, about to do yibum to, is an erva, especially if it's your mother-in-law. You certainly should know that. That should be clear information for you. So when it comes to erva, everybody knows what's going on. Therefore, we don't need any gzeras. That brings us to a new Mishnah, Chavtes Amud Aleph, 6 lines down. The next case sounds very similar, and if you just flip the page for a moment and skim Daf Lamed Amud Aleph, you'll see that all of the Mishnayos are short, but all of them start with Shlosha, one after the next. So even though the parak is Arba Achin, we're going to see a lot of cases of Shlosha Achin, and then we'll learn a lot of those cases tomorrow. But here, let's learn one more Mishnah. And this Mishnah will start now. We'll finish at the very last word on Chavtes Amud Beis, and then we'll stop for the day today. So the new Mishnah on Chavtes Amud Aleph writes as follows. Shlosha Achin, there are three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Shnaim Nisuin Shtei Achayos. Reuven is married to Rachel, Shimon is married to Shoshana, and Rachel and Shoshana are sisters. Ve'echad mufne. We've seen the word mufne before in the space of Gzeira Shava. What does it mean, ve'echad mufne? It means that the third brother is available. The Rishonim point out that it doesn't really matter that he's single. He, in theory, could have had a wife, because Yibum applies even if you have a wife, provided that you're the one on the receiving end, and there's no reason why that would make a difference. But in here, the Mishnah does detail that he's mufne. Meis echad mibale achayos. Let's say Reuven dies, and then Rachel falls in Yibum to Levi, to the third brother. However, something here happened unique. The asaba mufne maimer, and Levi does maimer. He does this quasi kiddushin to Rachel, indicating to her that he really would like to marry her. The achar kach meis echav hasheni. And then Shimon dies, and Shoshana now falls to Levi b'yibum. But let's look at the dynamic at this moment. Levi has already performed Maimer for Rachel, and now he has a new Yevama, a new incoming Yevama in Shoshana. So now he has one Maimer Yevama and one regular Yevama. So what is the status? How does he navigate? That's a machlokas tanaim. And the Mishnah says a third of the way down, Beishamai omrim ishto imo, his wife is with him, meaning that the maimer that Levi performed for Rachel seems to have some teeth to it. V'halazu, and the other wife, Teitze mishum achos isha, and Shoshana, who is the second Yevama who's now going to be pending marriage or chalitza, she gets neither. She's Teitze mishum achos isha, because when Levi did Maimer to Rachel, they're basically halachically married to some degree, which is going to be much of our discussion today. Is what is Beis Shammai Shita? So therefore, Shoshana, when she's the second Yevama inbound, so the halacha is that she doesn't have to do anything. She's Teitze, Mishum Achos Isha, no Chalitza, nothing. Beis Hillel argues, Beis Hillel Omrim, Motzi es Ishto, Beget ubechalitza. I disagree with Beis Shammai. When Levi did Maimer to Rachel, it would have been all well and good if Shimon didn't then die and have Shoshana fall to him b'yibum as well. And now, according to Beis Hillel, when Levi does Maimer to Rachel, Now he has to undo that. Motzi es ishto beget. Now he has to divorce Rachel to undo the maimer, and as well ubechalitza, because the maimer doesn't uproot the chalitza needs. He still has to do something there. Beishto beishes achid bechalitza, and then when Shoshana falls to him as well, she will get chalitza. So a big machlokes in the Tanaim here as to what we should do in this case when Levi did maimer to Rachel. When Levi did maimer to Rachel, and only after that happened did Shimon die, and his wife Shoshana falls to Levi as well, b'yibum. And the Mishnah concludes, Zohi sha'amru, this is similar to the phrase where we say, Oy lo al ishto, ve'oy lo al eshes achib, a reflection of the Shita of Beis Hillel, that it's bad news for Rachel, Ishto, the one he did maimer to, because he's forced to divorce her and do chalitza, and Oy lo al eshes achib, that even Shoshana, none of them get a good deal out of this, and both wives are lost in yibum. They're lost to the mitzvah of Yibum. Yes, they're lost through chalitza. It's not really, correct. They both have chalitza. I was speaking globally, but you're correct. It's chalitza. So the Gemara opens, picking up on this last phrase of the Mishnah. Whenever we see the language of Zohi, this very specific thing is, so then the Gemara often makes a diuk on that, as it does here. The Gemara opens 2/3 of the way down on Chavtes Amud Aleph, Zohi l'me'ute mai. What is our Mishnah trying to exclude by using this language? Says the Gemara, l'me'ute hachta Rabbi Yehoshua, de lo avdin on kavase. There's a case in another 90 blot from now, where Rabbi Yehoshua was talking about a case where one of the wives is a katana. We're not going to go into the details now, but the language of Zohi in this Mishnah indicates that only our Mishnah has the halacha this way, but the case of Rabbi Yehoshua is not like our Mishnah, where we say, Oy lo al ishto, oy lo al eshes achiv, de lo avdin on kavase, ela ikir Rabban Gamliel, ikir Rabbi Eliezer. We'll learn about this case in more detail. We're not going to spend time on it now. But what is for today's conversation is the following very important sugya in regards to the world of Yibum. And that is, how powerful is Maimer? And that's what we're going to be discussing for the next blot, for the next Amud. Says the Gemara, Amar Rebbe Lazar the Amora says, Lo Tema, do not say that Maimar Lebeis Shammai is Kona Kinyan Gamor. Don't say that even though in our Mishnah, it seems like the Maimer had some teeth to it in our Mishnah, because what ended up happening, we ended up saying that the Maimer was strong enough to cause for the second Yevama who was heading toward Levi to not even need chalitza. But still, says Rabbi Lazar, don't say that Beis Shammai holds that Maimer is a Kinyan Gamor to the point that it's not full marriage, such that in order to break that marriage, you would then need only a get. That's not true. Ella, rather, what does Rabbi Lazar say that Beis Shammai holds about Maimer? So the Gemara says 4 lines from the bottom, Ella, Maimer le Beis Shammai, eino kone ella lidchos b'tzara bilvad. The power of Maimer, according to Beis Shammai, is that, again, first Rachel falls to Yibum, and then Rachel's sister Shoshana falls to Yibum. When Rachel falls by Yibum, she gets Maimer. How powerful is that Maimer? So it says Beis Shammai, Rabbi Lazar, in the name of Beis Shammai, the Maimer is powerful enough to generate a bond between Levi and the first Yevama of Rachel, such that when Shoshana shows up, she doesn't need even chalitza. But that's it. The extent of Maimer is only to preclude Tzara, the second wife, from having any halachic need of chalitza or yibum. So the Gemara questions this. Amar Rabavin, af ananami tanina. We have a brisa that seems to be very similar to this. Now, this brisa was from the very opening of this parak of Arba Achen. The case we're dealing with is a case of Shlosha Achen, but this is a quote from our Mishnah at the beginning of the parak of Arba Achen a few blot ago. This can be found on Chavav Amud Aleph, and there we had said that if there are 2 sisters, that they should get chalitza and not yibum. And then the Gemara says there, on the second line of that Mishnah, on Chavav Amud Aleph, it says, V'im kidmu v'kansu yotziu, machlokas, that maybe they should be yotziu, and Beis Shammai was lenient. So that's the quote over here. Amar Rav Avin afana nami tanina. At the beginning of our parak of Arba Achen, when we learned about the case of 4 brothers, and 2 wives fell to 2 brothers, we said chalitza and not yibum. And what if you married them? So says the Gemara, quoting on the last line here on Chavtes Amud Aleph, Beis Shammai omrim yekaimu. What can be understood by Beis Shimon's opinion that if this couple marries, even when they shouldn't, in the case of Arba Achen, that they can stay married? Says the Gemara, yekaimu in. Yes, they can stay married if they got married, but lichatchila lo. But it's really not appropriate. They shouldn't have gotten married. Now, says the Gemara in regards to this brisa, Maimer lebeis Shammai kona kinyan gamor. The reason I know I'm right that Maimer isn't a permanent bond is because had it been that Maimer was a kinyan gamor, then what the Mishnah on Chaf Vav should have said at the beginning of the parak should have said, Zeh yasa Maimer v'yikneh, v'zem yasa Maimer v'yikneh, that if the women fall one at a time to Yibum, then there's no reason why they would ever need chalitza. If it's true that Maimer is powerful enough to generate a permanent bond, then the Mishnah on Daf Chavav should have looked very different. The Mishnah on Chavav should have said that if there's one wife who falls to brother 3, do Maimer right away. And when wife number 2 falls to brother 4, do Maimer right away. Yet our Mishnah does not say that. So what does that show you? So that's what the Mishnah is implying. That's what the Gemara is implying on the top of Chav Tes and Beis, that by virtue of the fact that our Mishnah on Daf Chavav does not use the language of Zeh Yasa Maimer V'Yikneh to be Koneh, the 2 Yevamos, one after the other, that shows us that Maimer isn't as powerful. Says the Gemara, Elamai, what then do you think that the Brisa means? Do you think it means that Docha D'Chia Gamura, that you're allowed to then just push off a tzara? How can you say that? If that's true, if it's true that Maimer is powerful enough to not need anything other than Maimer, that's it. So then what should the Mishnah on Chavav have said? It should have said, Zeh Yasa Maimer v'yidche. Then one could have done Maimer to the first wife, thereby removing an option for the second wife, and vice versa. Zeh Yasa Maimer v'yidche. And it doesn't say that either. Ella, says the Gemara, Ma'islach l'meimar. What is the only possible way to understand this brisa and Rebbe Lazar? It must be that Maimer dehetera dachi, de isura lo dachi. The only way to understand the Mishnah and Daf Chavav at the open of our parak of our Ba'achin is to say that there's 2 kinds of Maimer. There's Maimer that's done in a situation where technically you could actually do Yibum. Let's say in a classical case of Yibum, a woman, her husband dies and they have no kids, they fall to the brother, simple case of Yibum. And he says Maimer. That Maimer is called Maimer dehetera, and Maimer dehetera is very, very powerful. And Maimer deisura is lo dachi. So these are the 2, the distinction to be made. And Hachanami, in our case, this is as well true. Maimer in our Mishnah, afilu leman da'amar Maimer kona kinyan gamor. Even if you want to say that Maimer is very powerful, Maimer dehetera kani, it's only Maimer dehetera, Maimer where even Yibum could have taken place. But the Isura, had the Maimer been performed in a scenario with a second Yevama, where they could not really marry, then lo kani, then there's no real value there. It doesn't help at all. So basically, version number 1 is that this Mishnah that we have, this Brisa that we have, which we thought was a match to Rebbe Lazar, is not a match at all. That's all version 1 of Rebbe Lazar. But Rav Ashi Masni Hachi, Rav Ashi says there's another version of how to understand the sheets of Rebbe Lazar. And what's that? Let's remember that Rebbe Lazar said on the bottom of Chav Tes Amud Aleph in version 1, he had said that Maimer is not fully powerful, only powerful enough to not require the tzara to have chalitza. Let's try version number 2, 10 lines down. Says the Gemara, a little bit less, maybe 9 lines down. Rav Ashi Masni Hachi, Amar Rebbe Lazar, Lo tema Maimer lebeis Shammai dachi d'chia gemura. Don't say that when Beis Shammai employs Maimer, that he means that it's dachi d'chia gemura, that the tzara, that the second wife won't need even chalitza. She's clean, she can just go without any limitations. V'tzarasa chalitza nami lo baya, that the tzara would not need it. That's not correct. Ela doche umeshayerhu. Yes, she's doche from the fact that you can't do yibum. However, she still needs chalitza. So says the Gemara in this version 2, like it said before, Amar Ravavin, how does this work out if we were to line it up against the Brisa that Ravavin quoted before? Afana nami tanina. Beishamai omrim yikaimu in the chatchila lo. That Brisa that we saw, the Mishnah that we saw in Chavav, where Beishamai says that when the Yevamos fall to the brothers, that they should do chalitza, not yibum. And we said that if in fact they marry, Beishamai says yikaimu, they can stay married. But that's only true lechatchila. But it's not. That's only true b'di'eved, but lechatchila lo. So says the Gemara as follows. If in fact it was true that Maimer lebeis Shammai docha d'chia gamura, that really it should have been docha d'chia gamura, that the Sarah should not have even needed chalitza, then what should the Mishnah on Chavav had said? It should have said the power of Maimer. It should have said, instead of doing chalitza, forget chalitza. It should have said Zeh yasa Maimer v'yidche. That surviving brother number 1 is now going to marry Rachel, but he's going to do Maimer, and if he does Maimer to Rachel, then by definition Shoshana will not need need any chalitza, because that's what we would have said if Maimer was so powerful, and vice versa. But it did not say that, so we see that cannot be the case. Ve'ela, if that's true, haktani beishamai omrim ishto imo v'halazu teitzei mishum achosisha. But our Mishnah, our new Mishnah that we learned today on the previous Amud, says that according to Beis Shammai, the tzara does not need anything. So this brisa for sure doesn't support Beis Shammai, because this brisa indicates that there should be chalitza. Not that there shouldn't be, but our Mishnah says that there is no chalitza. So if that's true that there's no chalitza by the tzara, then how do we understand this? Ella, Yevama dechazia lekulhu. When it comes to a Yevama who is fit to be married, then chazia lemiktsasa. Yevama de lo chazia lekulhu lo chazia lemiktsasa. What is the Gemara saying here? That if there is a Yevama who really can be married, and they do maimer, then that chalitza, then that maimer that's done to her can, in fact, cancel out the need for the tzara to have chalitza. However, if the Yevama is the lo chazia lekulhu, she's really not fit to be married. So then when we do maimer for her, it does not remove the need for the tzara to have chalitza. End of sugya number 1 for the day. We'll end of part 1 for the sugya today. And the second is the following question. Boy Rava, it should be Rava, because I guess it could be Rabba, but in the flow of the Gemara, it makes more sense that it's Rava, because we know Rabba was a 3rd century Amor. He was a Rebbe to some of the 4th century Amoraim. But this dialogue between Rava and Abaye, it seems to make more sense that it should be Rava. This is a discussion on the side here. If you look in Os Katan Aleph, it says in the Hagos V'Tzionim Defusim Yeshanim Rava. Ayin Tosfos Kan Dibra Maskel Evedu Lakaman Lamates. Whatever. This is a discussion about who it is. But let's just assume for the moment that it's Rava. Boy Rava. Maimer le Beis Shammai. When Maimer thinks about Beis Shammai, do we say Nesuin Osa? Do we say that Maimer is powerful enough that it's as if they're fully married? O Erusin Osa? Or is it only simply a betrothal? So says the Gemara, Amar le Abai lemay hilchaso. Why are you asking? Can't be for what we just spoke about, because what we just spoke about was whether or not Maimer was powerful enough to remove the need for chalitza from a tzara. So that's not what it's talking about. So it says the Gemara, Lamai Hilchasa, Abaye says to Rava, what topic are you discussing? Ilema li Yorsha, if you're talking about whether or not she'd get any Yerusha from her husband when he dies, Vilitmala, whether or not they're married enough just through Maimer that he as a Kohen should become Tameh for her if she dies, Ulahafer Nedareha, and to be Mayfair her Neder, we know that the Torah writes that when a woman is married, that her husband can annul her vows. So is Maimer enough to go over the threshold of Yerusha, of Tuma, of Hafaras Nedarim? So would that be the case? Well, says the Gemara, Hashda Arusa Be'alma. If a regular Arusa, forget Yibum, if a regular Arusa got engaged, that wouldn't be the case, because Tani Reb Chia, Ishto Arusa Lo Onein, there's no Aninus if she dies, and Vilomatamela, he's not allowed to become Tameh for her if he's a Kohen. The same halachos are reversed as well. Lo Onenes, if her husband dies, she's not an Onenes, she keeps mitzvos like regular, Vilomatamos Lo, she can't become Tameh for him. Mesa in a Yorsha, if she dies, then there's no Yerusha for her. And Mace, if he dies, if he dies, then Gova Ksuba. So she does collect the Ksuba. But Ovad, but Maimer Mibaya, if when it comes to a regular case of engagement and Arusa, you're trying to compare Maimer to Arusa. Arusa itself doesn't have any of these restrictions. They're not fully married. And most of the rights that come about through Erusin are not strong enough to generate that bond. So that can't be what you're talking about. So it says the Gemara, what then was Rava's question? What was Rava asking about? Why was he trying to compare Maimer either to Erusin or Nesuin, to the early betrothal stage of marriage or to the complete stage of marriage? So it says the Gemara, a little bit more than halfway down, Ve'ela, really what Rava was asking about was Le'inyan Mesira L'chuppah. What does it mean, that the giving over of the chuppah? What does this mean? So when a woman gets married, it has to be bedaita. A woman cannot be forced to be married. She has to agree to be mesira. She has to be agreed to be handed over from her father's house into the home of her husband. Has to be something that it's not, we don't force marriage. It's not allowed. So says the Gemara, Mayu, what would the halacha be? Do we say that Maimer is like Nesuin Ose, Velomi boy mesira l'chuppah? Maimer is like Nesuin. Maimer is like already a done deal. The marriage is already done, and therefore we don't need Mesira L'chuppah. We don't need her to agree. We know that the halacha is that by Yibum, that a woman does not have to agree. It can be forced upon her. The nature of marrying someone for a woman is that when a woman marries a man, quote unquote, built into the fine print is that if her husband dies and she has no kids, she has to marry her brother. It's built into the fine print. It's psukim and chumash. It's not a secret. So then the Gemara says that maybe we should say that if there's mimer, that we don't have to worry about mesira l'chuppah. We don't need her permission anymore because mimer's like nisuin. So that's what the Gemara is saying, is that this little derabanan kinyan of let's get married through mimer, how powerful is it? Do we say that it's like nisuin and there's no need for her permission? O dilma, or perhaps erisin oseh ubaya mesira l'chuppah. Maybe it only makes her like she's betrothed, and when a woman is only be'erisin, she does need to give rishus for mesira l'chuppah. So which one is it? Ubaya mesira l'chuppah, says the Gemara. Amar lei hashta lo avad b'maimer, when there's no mimer at all. So what's the din? Ksiv, the pasuk writes in Chumash Yevama Yavola, and even the drasha is Bal Korcha. When a woman is a Yevama, we don't have to ask her permission. Again, that's the fine print of getting married, is that a Yevama has to marry her brother that she was never married to before. That's the din. So then avad b'maimer mibaya. So then that's ridiculous. If without that, when they get married, she's allowed to be forced. Mimer doesn't solve that problem. So the Gemara says, Amar le, Rava says back to Abaye, no. Here's my question about mimer. She'ani omer, Rava says, and this is a very important line in Lamdas for Maseches Yevamos. Kol ha'osa mimer bi'avimto. Anyone who goes through this rabbinic marriage, this kedusha Yevama, parcha mimenu zikas Yevamin, this marriage of mimer makes the zikas Yevamin dissolve, and in its place, v'chala aleh zikas erusin. Okay, this is a change in thinking here. Now, what Rava is saying is that, let's say that I'm doing yibum. If I'm doing yibum and I'm doing mimer, so I go to this process of mimer, I have my edim harad mekudeshes, whatever the mimer process is. So then she changes now. Now it's not zikas yibum between me and her. That's gone. Parcha. It flew away. It's gone. Now we have a zikas erusin between us. So that's what the Gemara is asking. Rava is saying, because I hold that the mechanics of mimer change her zika from zikas yevamin to zikas erusin, how then does that play out in our conversation? So the Gemara responds with a brisa. What would the din be? First long line. 2/3 of the way down, heading to the last word on the page, Chav Tes Amud Aleph. I said 25 minutes. I was wrong. It's going to be 31 minutes. I was close. Says the Gemara as follows: Tashma Shomeres Yavam. Shomeres Yavam. If there is a woman who is waiting for Yibum, her husband died, she has not yet married. Bein Yavam Echad Bein Shnei Yavamin. Whether or not there's one or two brothers who might be her Yavam. So that's a machlokes in regards to, as a Shomeres Yavam, as to whether or not the Yavam can be Mefer Neder. Can they nullify her vows? Namely, how married are they? Because you have to be married to nullify vows. Says Gemara, big machlokes tanaim. Second of the wide lines. Rabbi Elazar Omer Yafer. One of them can. One of them can nullify. Rabbi Yeshua Omer le'echad v'lo l'shnayim. Only one person can nullify, but not both. Only one yavam can nullify, not both. Rabbi Kiva Omer lo le'echad v'lo l'shnayim. Oh, none of them can do hafaras nadar. What's going on here? But when we analyze this brisa, here's what we'll figure out. Bishlama Rabbi Akiva savar ein zika filu dechad. Rabbi Akiva is just flat line. There's no zika, and because there's no zika, there's no reason to assume that Yavam 1 or Yavam 2 could do any hafaras neder. They cannot nullify any of her vows. She has no zika to them at all. Done. Over. Rabbi Yeshua l'chad yesh zika l'trei ein zika. Rabbi Yeshua has a certain logic. Okay, how many people can you have zika to? You can only marry one, so you have zika to one, the older one, whichever one. But you don't have zika to two. So what did Rabbi Yeshua say in the brisa? He had said le'echad v'lo l'shnayim, that only one person could be made for the neder. So Rabbi Yeshua l'chad yesh zika l'trei ein zika. Elo Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is found on the second of the wide lines on Chav Tes and Beis. What did he say? He said yafer. That is a singular word, which we have to get back to in a moment. Elo Rabbi Eliezer nihi nami de kasavar yesh zika. Let's give to the fact. Let's give a nod that he holds that there is zika. Bishlama lechad mefer, I can understand how at least one person. Elo l'trei amai. Now these words are not simple because they don't seem to mean what they say. They seem to imply elo l'trei amai. Why would there be two? But Rashi here changes that understanding. Rashi on the fourth line of the wide lines of Rashi, Dibur Maschel elo l'trei amai. Rashi says Nehi nami diyesh zika afilu afilu litrei mihu yesh zika, afilu litrei mihu yafru l'shnehem miboile. It should be that both of them should be able to do zika. So really, the Gemara is saying, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he seems to agree that both would be able to do zika. And what did Rav Ami say the case was here? And what was this brisa talking about? You're adding in a new ingredient into the mixing bowl now. When you say that this brisa has maimer, and we're trying to answer how powerful is maimer as it relates to a case of erisin or a zika of maimer, what did Rava just say? That when there is maimer between a yavam and a yavama, then it changes from zikas yavamin to zikas erisin. So how powerful is zikas erisin? So says the Gemara, kigon de'avad ba maimer ubeishamai hi de'amar maimer kona kinyan gamor, and we're asking Beishamai's question within the framework of Beishamai sheet. We're asking Rava's question within the framework of Beishamai Shita that a maimer is kona kinyan gamor. So let's ask the question now very clearly. The brisa we're trying to work with is the brisa that starts on the first of the long lines of Chav Testament base. What we don't understand right now is how we paskin from this brisa. This brisa is talking about a case of maimer where we hold that maimer is kona kinyan gamor. So says the Gemara as follows, 10 lines from the bottom. I amris bishlama nisuin ose. If you want to say that maimer is like nisuin, then I fully understand this mishnah. Mishum hachi mefer, they're fully married. If maimer is like a full nisuin, then of course then he can be mefer neder. If you want to say that really maimer only generates erisin, only a betrothal state, so then hechi matzi mefer. How then can there be hafara according to Rabbi Akiva, to Rabbi Eliezer? After all, v'hatnan na'ara ha'me'urasa. If there's a woman who's only engaged, what's the status? The husband can't do hafara on his own. Avia ubayla mefirin nedareh. Only with both of them, which shows us that maimer is like nisuin. That the only time hafara can take place, the only way this brisa makes sense is if maimer is only if maimer is equivalent to nisuin. Says the Gemara, not necessarily. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, my Mayfair. But what then does our brisa mean by Mayfair? Maybe it doesn't mean to imply anything about Maimer being equal to Nisuin, but rather Mayfair b'shutfis. There's a unique din that when there's an arus and when there's his father-in-law that they can do hafara. It's not a din about a din of leaving any implications about Maimer being like Nisuin at all. Maybe it's still like the erisin. Says the Gemara, continuing its analysis, this is the shita we saw in the bottom of Chav Testament Aleph. According to Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that maimer, according to Beis Shammai, is only kona in as much as it pushes away the second wife who does not need chalitza. Why then would it be that he's allowed to be mefer b'shutfis? Amar lach Rabbi Eliezer, don't ask a question against me. Amar de amre ana eino kona ela litchos l'tzara bilvad. I taught my halacha in a vacuum. I was only talking about the tzara. The lo sagi la begita. A get is not enough for her. I wasn't even talking about hafara. Don't ask a question on me. I was only talking about one narrow scope question with Beis Shammai. And that one question was whether or not maimer would generate enough of a connection to remove chalitza from the tzara. But I wasn't talking about hafara at all. Or a second possible answer, 4 lines from the bottom. Amar lach Rabbi Elazar, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak minicha. It wouldn't work for Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak shita either for his answer of shutfis. After all, shutfis implies 2 people. What did Rabbi Eliezer say in this brisa? Miktani yefaru, plural? Yeah, no, it's just yafer katani, just one person. Ella, what is this brisa about hafara talking about with the 3 shitas of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Akiva? What does it mean, sha'amda b'din? So the Gemara says the brisa is talking about a case where a Yevama fell to a Yavam, but he refused to do Yibum or Chalitza. So Amda Bedin, she brought him to Bezdin. Upaskule mizonos mishalo, and Bezdin paskin that until further notice, he is obligated to support her with food. And then on top of that, once that happens, then they're bound enough that hafara works. That whenever a woman makes a neder, whenever a woman is bound in this yibum status, then once the husband is being posek mizonoseha, then he can be mefer neder. We cannot learn anything from the brisa about whether or not maimer is like nisuin or erisin. We will stop right here tomorrow morning, right after the 6:30 shachris. We'll start at 7:10 punctually. joining. And if you're here, you're not. I'll post everything, and we'll stop right here. Wishing you all a beautiful night.